Hello. How you doing? Excellent. All right. A little energy in the room. I'm Howard Scott Warshaw. Many of you may or may not know me. Thank you. Thank you. In the true spirit of interactive entertainment, which is, what we were doing at Atari, we were kind of breaking new ground, right, in the field of interactive entertainment. That's the way I look at it. So I decided that today what I'm going to do is a very interactive presentation. So you are going to be part of the presentation today. I hope you're all prepared. Did you make notes? Okay. So the first thing I want to say is I have a very important public service announcement. And that is, I just found out on the floor that there is actually, so I have to tell you how this happened. Is I went up to one of the booths where they're selling games, said, hey, you have any 2600 games? And they go, yeah. And so I do what I do a lot of times. I go, hey, you have any Yar's Revenge? And they go, yeah, we do. I say, you have any E.T.s? He goes, yeah, I think we have a couple. He goes, yeah, the guy who made those was here, and he was telling us about how he worked on Othello also. He was going to sign an Othello for it. I said, really? I said, the guy who did Yar's Revenge and E.T. was here? Was he really here? He goes, yeah. I said, I heard he did Raiders of the Lost Ark too. They go, yeah, he did. I said, he didn't do Othello though. They go, yeah, he did. He was here. No, I said, no, I'm pretty sure he did not do Othello. and he goes, no, he said he did. I said, well, and I took out my driver's license. And I said, well, actually, I'm Howard Scott Warshaw. I said, I think I know what games I did. But apparently there's some guy going around saying he's me signing cards. So if you're going to get an autograph, make sure you authenticate it. So now, next time somebody goes up to someone at the autograph thing and says, can I see your driver's license first? That's going to be an interesting moment. So that's my public service announcement. But interactive entertainment. So we can do this a number of different ways. So one thing I have is I have a book that I'm writing. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. I'm actually writing a book about my experience on Ataris, the impact I had at Atari and the impact Atari had on me, which still is going on. It's an ongoing thing. Atari is a part of my life that never stops, as all of you are testament to. Thank you. So I can read some of that. I can actually read an excerpt from the book if you have any interest in that. I can also just talk to you some about games and gaming and what that means and nowadays versus old days, or we can just do Q&A. So I'd like you to let me know what you're interested in. So do you guys want to do some Q&A at any point? Okay, that's always fun. I like the dynamic question aspect. Are you interested at all in hearing anything from the book? Yes. Actually, you are. Okay. So what we can do is I can read I can read some of it, and then we can say you want to hear more or not. We can stop and we can gauge how that goes. And the interactive entertainment thing, I just think it is an interesting thing to talk about briefly. Is interactive entertainment. There's one thing that keeps coming up is people go, you did one of the first movie conversions. And you did one of the most notorious movie conversions. And the idea of mixing movies and video games is a topic that keeps coming up. And people are still trying to do it. Now, there's certainly video games that have cutscenes in them. And so that's one way to mix movies and video games. And that's true, but can you really mix? Can you have an interactive movie, which has been the goal since Hollywood and video games squared off across the aisle and kept kind of trying to look on each other's paper, which I think has been going on for a long time. And it's my hypothesis that that's impossible, that will never happen, that there's no such thing as the interactive movie. How many of you believe that's true? All right, how many of you believe that's baloney and there's no way, of course there's such a thing as an interactive movie?
That's what video games are.
Video games are interactive movies?
The best ones are.
Yeah, you can look at it that way. And there is Bandersnatch, right? Which is basically Dragon Quest, right? Dragon's Lair, updated, right? And that's cool, but I would postulate that is actually a video game where the payoff is cutscenes. An interactive movie, here's why I think there's no such thing. It goes to the nature of entertainment. If you think about it, movies are inherently a passive medium, right? The contract you have between the entertainer and the entertainee, to wit the audience, is that I'm going to give you my attention, and you are going to take me on a journey. And I'm going to judge you as to whether or not it's a good journey or not. And then I'm going to go online and give you a lot of feedback as to whether it was any good. So that's kind of the contract that we have with movies. With games, the onus is on the player. The player determines the journey. It's interactive by nature. So in the one case, you have a passive medium. In the other case, you have an active medium. And I don't think there's such a thing as a passive-active medium. As many of you may well know, I'm a therapist now. I'm a psychotherapist and practicing for a number of years. Some people say I became a therapist primarily to address the depression and the trauma that I created with the E.T. game. And I think that's a reasonable take. It's a reasonable take on it. And no need to thank me. It was my obligation, and I'm willing to fulfill it, take up the mantle. But so there is passive-aggressive behavior. I'm very familiar with that, right? But if you think about it, active-passive doesn't really make sense. Usually it's one or the other. And that's why I think there's no such thing as a truly interactive movie. Because if you have to get up and start changing the channel in the middle of your entertainment experience, you're not being entertained. You're now playing. And that's a different thing. So I just want to throw that out because I think that's an interesting thing that comes up. And Bandersnatch is a very interesting exercise. And I'm not saying it isn't a worthwhile thing to do. The idea of a movie where you choose which way it goes is an interesting thing to do. And what it's really designed for is to keep hardcore nerds busy for a long period of time. Because who isn't going to try and explore every path through Bandersnatch, right? And do you know how long that takes? I haven't calculated it yet, but I'm sure the people at Netflix know exactly how many minutes and seconds it is to explore the entire database. But I think it's an interesting idea. Just wanted to put that out there. Are there any questions right off the bat? Does anybody have any burning questions you came in here thinking I'm going to ask Howard that one? Yes?
What was the expectation from Steven Spielberg about what part of Raiders of the Lost Ark was going to be in a game? Did he have any expectations?
I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, so the question was, did Steven Spielberg have any specific expectations about what I would do with the movie? And actually, no. Like, not at all. We never even discussed the design of the game. Steven Spielberg is a pretty interesting guy, and what he does, at least to my experience, is when he knows how to get people who are good at what they do and let them do what they do. There are some people who run projects who don't know how to do that, and there are some people who run projects who do know how to do that. And there are good and bad people on either side of that. But Spielberg is definitely one of the people, like Stan Winston would be another example of somebody that you pick someone who's really good with it, he lets them do their stuff and he works around that. So we met a couple of times during the development, but it was mostly to have lunch and chat, and I gave him I literally had these pink sunglasses. So I remember one time he came up to visit, we were walking from one building to another. I said, hey Steven, check this out. And I have rose-colored glasses that I see the world through. And it was a cloudy day, and the glasses made the clouds look really cool, and it was kind of a fun moment. But we really didn't talk about the game much. We talked about Yar's Revenge when I first met him, when I first went down to interview, basically, to do Raiders. And he was interested about that, but with Raiders, he just liked what I had done before. He really liked the fact that I told him he was an alien, which I did. I've even heard that story. Have you guys heard the story before about him? Okay, well, when I went down to meet Steven Spielberg for the first time, it's a whole involved story, and that's covered in depth in the book. But when I finally got to talk to him, I told him, Steven, I have this theory about you, about how you're an alien. Would you like to hear it? And he goes, yeah, I would like to hear that. And so I said, okay. And so I just explained to him, this was the early 80s, and it really felt like we were getting close to making contact with extraterrestrials. And I said to him, I figured the aliens, if they show up, it's not going to be like War of the Worlds. I figured they're going to send, if they're smart enough to get here and want to meet us or deal with us, they'll send an advance team. They'll send some people to culturalize the Earth to prepare us to meet them. And I said, look at you, you make these movies where aliens are friendly and we're all engaged and between Close Encounters and E.T., they're really friendly movies and it's really great and it shows aliens in a nice light. And I said, so I figure you're like the production arm, of this advanced team. And then you have your marketing team. Look, these movies have been seen in every language all over the world. I said, great marketing team out there disseminating the word, getting it all over the place. And so now we're ready to meet the aliens in a more peaceful nature. So I just want to say, nice job. And I really think that got me the game. I think that story was the thing more than anything else that I did that got me the thing. So that was it. But after that, there was very little interaction. On E.T., I did have to go and present a design to him. And that's actually also detailed, elaborate in the book. But there was no such presentation with Raiders. It was just, he said, Howard's going to do Raiders. That was okay. And I didn't see him for a few months. Good question, man. Yes, in the back.
I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about your process and just the crunch time of when you had to program E.T. I did like the game as a kid, but when I found out that you had that crunch time and later did composing earlier in my life and had those crunch moments where I had to do something in a very truncated amount of time, it meant more to me. And when I found out that story about you, which I don't know enough about, it was kind of a romantic hit in my mind. I'm like, oh,
Nice. Nice. Well, I didn't realize I was coming to Portland for a romantic interlude, but I just want to say I'm open to the possibility. Let me just say this first. I'm thirsty. Yeah, okay. The Process of Working on E.T. by Howard Scott Warshaw. So it was an interesting thing. It was a challenge. When I was told, you have to do E.T. and you have to do it, and it was July 27th, and I was told for September 1st. You have to have the game for September 1st. It didn't take me long to figure that's like 5 weeks. And I thought, holy crap, nobody had done a game in much less than 6 months at that point. And I thought, oh yeah, I can do this. No problem. Because I don't know exactly what I was full of, but I was overflowing with it at this point. Because I had already done Yards, which was very well received, and Raiders I was just finishing Raiders, and that was looking really good, and Spielberg liked it, so I was good with that. And so now we want to do E.T., and we want to do it in really fast. And I thought, okay. So I committed to doing it before I really thought about doing it, because that's where I was. And then when I started to think about it, I realized that you think of it as, wow, that's a really tough programming problem, right? To do that much code and all that and get all that together in that short a time. But it really isn't a programming problem. It's a design problem, right? Usually the design process for making a VCS game is you start experimenting with techniques and you think it's some kind of gameplay and you start playing with it, you put it up on the screen, you start working with it, and you manipulate it, you tune it, and you add things, you subtract things, and you take as long as you need, and the goal is to make a good game. And the variable is how much time does it take. But that wasn't the case here. In this case, the goal was to finish a game in 5 weeks. That's it, just to get something done, like done in 5 weeks. And the variable is how good a game are you going to make. That's an inversion in your design concept, but as long as you're aware of that, you can work with it. So that's the way I approached it. The first thing I thought was, okay, so I'm not just trying to make a good game, which would normally be my goal. My goal is to figure out something that I can do in 5 weeks and see if I can make that playable. And that was the essence of the approach, right? And the rest is just details that some people have, everybody has their own opinion about it. But I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed the game. But the other part of the thinking about it is, okay, so you don't have much time, so you have to do something that's doable in a certain amount of time, but you want to give it life. You want to give it legs, as they say. So most action games require a lot of tuning to really have the right feel and the right pacing, and that takes time. Because the other thing I realized about this was I was mildly delusional, okay, to say, sure, I'll do a game in 5 weeks, but I wasn't totally balls to the wall psychotic, okay? So what I realized was, you know, I'm probably going to be able to go as far as what we call first playable. Right now, first playable is a place usually where game development begins. Right, in game development, you have a design, you have a basic play you're going for, and you start putting the game together, and at some point, the graphics can look horrible, you have just little blocks or X's for things, but you get to a point where every element of the game is represented, and you've approximated their motion and the rules of the game there, and for the first time, you can actually get the experience of playing the game, right? That's called first playable. And that should come anywhere between like 20 to 50% into this game schedule. And the rest of the schedule is where you're actually making the game. Right now you're doing things to improve the game or to rework the game, or you're making knowledgeable decisions about the game because you have a chance to play the game. And that's great. So most games are mostly the tuning and rumination and figuring out what to do. What I realized was I'm not going to have that. That's just not going to exist. So what it does, it puts all the pressure on the design because basically I'm going to be able to do first playable and then I'm going to have to release that. So what's something I can do that I'll be able to hit the target and I won't need too much tuning? And what it occurred to me was, you know, a treasure hunt game. A treasure hunt game is a great game. You have stuff to hide and you have places to hide it, and you have the protagonist, who's the player, who's running around trying to find it and assemble it, and then you have antagonists. You have something, some kind of obstruction or obstacle that's barring you. And so I thought, okay, when you do a game like that, if you have like N things to hide and M places to hide it, then you have like M combinations of N possible game layouts. So you can make a relatively short play game, which is you do a round of finding the treasure, putting it together, doing whatever you need to it, and depositing it in the bank abstractly. And then if that's fun, if you make that exercise fun, then you randomize it, which is very quick to do, and hand it back to the player again and say, here, do it again. Do it as many times as you want. And so that was the idea, is doing a short, simple game that's replayable. And if I have enough places to hide stuff, which is why there's all the pits, the game can have life if it gets regenerated. So, and as for why it's tough to fall back in the pits, not that anybody was going to ask that question, but as for, you know, why that's tough, it's like, yeah, I did look at that originally, and I thought, you know, maybe that's not a great game mechanic, but in my mind, I thought, oh my God, there's hardly any gameplay here. I need gameplay. There's got to be gameplay somewhere in this game. And I thought, okay, so navigating your way and learning to work around the pits, it's a little tough, but that's your gameplay. And I specifically left that in that way because that gave me the illusion of gameplay in the game. And I'm not saying that was a brilliant choice, and I am not saying that was tremendous foresight on my part, but that was the thinking. But I tried to come up with something that I could do, and on top of that, it wasn't enough just to do the game. Me being who I am, I thought, well, what am I going to do that's breakthrough? What can I do that's innovative? Because I always want to do something groundbreaking in every game that I do. And so the things that I did in E.T., because it was expedient, that turned out to be somewhat groundbreaking. I think it was one of the first 3D gaming worlds, right? Because E.T. is played on a cube. And the cube is reliable, and you go, you know, wherever you go on the cube, it makes sense to go to the next screen. So it actually had a 3D playing world in a sense. It also had context-sensitive power, right? You know, you run around the screen, and depending on where you are, that's what your power activation does. I don't know if anybody had done that before either in a game. So having context-sensitive capabilities in addition to a 3D world, so that was my nod to breakthrough. But in terms of being groundbreaking, I have to say, how many of you have seen the movie Atari Game Over? Has anybody seen that? Okay, in that movie, they basically prove that about 30 years later, E.T. was totally a groundbreaking game. So I just want to say, I think I achieved the goal. So, does that answer your question? That's kind of a long way around. Yes, over here.
You guys are lucky, in my opinion. 2 people designed the hardware on the 2600. I'm the one who's still alive. Doesn't matter who I am. In my opinion, the top 4 original games, not ports from the arcades. The top 4, River Raid by Carol, who is not here, Adventure by Robinette, who is not here. The other 2 are in the room. Dave Crane, Pitfall. He did Yar's Revenge. Top 4, bar none.
Well, let's hear it for David Crane. I'd ask him to stand up, but he's so tall you can already see him there. Thank you, Joe, who I don't know who you are. What a spontaneous and wonderful contribution. I really appreciate it.
Between the 2 of the 4 right here.
But I gotta say, the high praise. It is an honor to have someone who is the designer of the hardware consider one of the works that I did an important work on it. So thank you. I
True
really
enough,
mean that.
always.
Yes, you were next, I believe.
So you brought up Bandersnatch. So give me an alternative timeline. Had you turned down the gig, what would be the best or the worst thing that would have happened? What would Atari done with the license afterwards, in your opinion?
If I hadn't done E.T.?
Yeah, would they give it to somebody else, or would they have abandoned it, or best?
I tried to give it to someone else. No one else was going to do it. I mean, there was literally a meeting we had about the 3rd day in the schedule where it was announced that I was doing E.T. and everybody's like, oh, Howard gets to do E.T., just did Raiders, you know, and it was like griping. I don't like to hear griping. So, and I'm an equal opportunity dude, I gotta say. So what I did was I stood up in that meeting and I said, hey, I said, anybody who wants this game, I said, this game is due September 1st. I said, anybody who wants it, you can have it. Just raise your hand, you can have it. Crickets, right? That was the last time anybody complained to me about doing E.T. Which is not to say that people didn't discuss it. Everybody spent the next 5 weeks saying, Howard's crazy, he's out of his mind. It was a crazy thing to do, but you know, he's a crazy guy. And to me, it was very important to do. But if I wouldn't have done it, I think what would have happened was Atari would have basically lost $22 million on the license. Because it was, nobody else was going to touch it. And they felt it absolutely had to be there for the Christmas market. And that was sort of prescient in and of itself, because that was the last season of good sales for the VCS games, I believe. There and here.
Me first? Oh,
Yeah.
This is more for the therapist for you. A couple of years ago, I asked you a question on something where I was tapped to do an observation on one of our pilots for the airline, and it was going to come down to my determination whether or not we kept him or not. And your advice, which was, this guy isn't fitting in with the team. What do I need to do here? How do I go about this? And you said, you need to look at it from a different direction, which was, is the team right for him? That little bit of information changed everything. And long story short, he's now a captain with our airline and is doing great. I just did his first his annual observation on him, and it was what your advice was everything. Thank you.
Wow, great question. So, thank you. For those of you who may not have heard what he said, he basically said I'm a fabulous therapist, to summarize. But I have 2 words for you in response to what you said, and this comes straight from my heart. No charge. Yes?
What was your real reaction after what happened with E.T.? Did you really get depressed?
Did I really get depressed? My reaction to E.T. is a very long and unfolding story. But since you're all here, it's a tricky thing. I mean, you could write an entire book about what it would take, how that went on in my life and stuff. And in fact, I am writing that book. So I'm hoping you're all going to... How many of you are interested in a book that I would write about my experience with E.T.? Would you actually... How many of you would pay $9.95 to read that book? Just want to check. Okay, cool. Then I'll finish the book. But I'll give you some previews. An important thing to understand is that E.T. as a failure, as a horror story and all that, didn't really occur till much later. So I finished E.T. September 1st, right, in 1982. For the next 4 months, or 5 months, I'm not hearing anything but good stuff. Right, for one thing, nobody can believe I actually finished the game, and it got through Q&A, and it went out, and it was good. So that was great, everybody was happy about that. And then the next feedback I really had about the game was it was like near the top on the Billboard chart sales. Again, not bad feedback. So far it's all good. It wasn't until early in 1983 when amazing amounts of returns were coming back, and it was starting to look a little weird that there was some feedback, but no one was saying worst game of all time or anything like that. You need the internet for something like that. And there was no internet yet for many years, right? So it was like, it was there, but the thing I would hear is people would be coming up to me, people from other buildings would come up and they'd be walking through engineering, which they did occasionally, particularly after I got rid of the whip that I was using on Raiders of the Lost Ark. We saw them a lot more frequently after that. And they would say things like, you know, Howard, we don't blame you. We don't blame you. It's really not, you really came through for us. And I'd be like, thanks. And they'd walk away and I'd think, what the hell are they talking about? I had no idea, but I mean, that happened a few times. It's just an interesting phenomenon. And then I found out later, I realized, oh, there's a lot of returns. And we didn't get a lot of sales feedback in engineering. What we heard mostly in engineering was, where's the next game? Where is it? Come on, let's have it. That's what we heard mostly. So it wasn't bad. And then, years later, it was many years later, and the web, and the internet, and top 10 lists, and E.T. is the horrible game, and then in 1995, New Media Magazine actually, wrote this whole article saying that E.T. single-handedly toppled $1 billion industry. And I thought, yeah. Are you kidding? 8K of code topples the industry? Going right on my resume, right? And I started to deal with it like I deal with most things with my sense of humor, right? And I started to think, I don't really think it's the worst game, I don't think E.T. is the worst game by a long stretch, but I prefer when people call it the worst game. I like it when people say E.T. is the worst game, because I did Yar's Revenge. Yar's Revenge is frequently cited as one of the best games of all time. So as long as E.T. is the worst game of all time, I got the greatest range of any designer in history, And I'm proud of that. That's cool, right? So I have one game that's in the New York Museum of Modern Art, and I have one game that's the subflooring of the New Mexico desert. And then I have Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I feel very comfortable about that. But eventually, I carried this for a long time. And when we did the movie Atari Game Over, and I didn't know what was going to come out with that. That was kind of an interesting experience because I did many, many hours of interviews with, Zach Penn is the guy who directed that. He's like an A-list Hollywood writer and a pretty experienced director. The producers of that have like 2 Emmys and an Oscar between them. This was like a really high-end production. And if you've ever looked at Zach Penn's other movies, they're mockumentaries. And I thought, oh, God, no. Because I opened my heart. I really put a lot of stuff out there. And I thought, oh no, if this guy wants to do a hatchet job, I'm dead. I am dead. So I didn't know what it was going to be. And I didn't get a chance to see anything about it or nothing about it until Comic-Con in 2014, I think September of 2014. And I'm at Comic-Con and I'm meeting some of the people from the production staff from the movie. And they're walking around, they're coming up and they're going, you're really gonna be happy with this movie. You're really gonna like this movie. And for some reason, what came to mind, what I would hear when they would say that, I would hear, don't worry, Howard, nobody blames you. It was really nerve-wracking. And then they actually had the premiere. They had a premiere, and I was there, and some other people from the movie were there, and Nolan Bushnell was there. My old pal, Nolan Bushnell, who I never knew at Atari, but have come to know since Atari. And so we were sitting right next to each other, we're watching the movie. Great movie, by the way, just have to say. That Howard guy was really something. And they finished the movie, and they're introducing people. And he introduces the people from the movie, and they get applause, Then he introduces Nolan Bushnell. And people applaud for Nolan. And then he introduced me. And it was like a 1-minute standing ovation. And I got choked up. I really did. I get choked up now just thinking about it. And in that moment, I realized how intense carrying that had been for so long. I never wanted to admit it. I never wanted to honestly share that with myself. And I'm a therapist, for God's sake. But I really realized in that moment how it really was kind of tough carrying that for so long. And this movie was a vindication in a lot of ways, because they really told the story pretty straight, which most people don't do. Not that it's gender fluid, but I mean, that's the way it goes. And so, there was an aspect that was difficult that I kind of hid within myself for a long time, and then finally came out and sort of dealt with it, and I'm cool with it now. But it was interesting. There was a number of very emotional things about E.T., and in the movie, you see I get very emotional when the games actually come up, and they're shown there. A lot of people think, oh, they found the game, oh God. You know, that's not really what the emotion was about. What it was about, honestly, was, you know, I always looked at video games as a piece of broadcast media. That's the way everybody has their own way of looking at games. But to me, it's a piece of broadcast media. And the goal of broadcast media, in my opinion, is to inform, to entertain, and ultimately to generate social discourse. You know, that's like the highest form of media, is to get people talking about it. And I realized that, you know, after 30 years, there was still this huge crowd of people that was super interested in this thing. This little thing that I had done in 5 weeks, all that time ago, was still generating this amount of press and interest, and people had traveled from far away to see, what is this? Is there actually anything there? Is this what's going on? And in that moment, people were so excited and so happy, and there was so much going on. I thought, yeah, this thing that I did long ago is still making people happy. It's still creating special moments for people. And that was tremendously meaningful for me. And I'm such like a wuss, so when it wells up, it pours out, and that's just the way it goes with me. Does that answer your question? Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yes?
Any thoughts of getting back in the game?
Back in the game of games?
Yeah.
Yes. Next one? No. I do, and I am definitely not going to do an E.T. remake, so don't worry about that. I'm done with E.T. I've had enough of E.T. for my entire life, except for talking about E.T. I'm okay with talking about E.T. And actually, people ask me, like, what would you do to fix E.T.? And some of that has been done, right? The people have put out an updated version of E.T. And so that was kind of fun. And I got to play that on set at that movie. But I am thinking of doing, I will get there, I promise you. I am thinking of doing a Yar's Revenge sequel that I had designed in my head back at Atari. I've never seen the gameplay done. It's a new, original gameplay. Nobody's ever done it before. I think it'd be very compelling, and I'm thinking of doing something like that. So, to that extent, I would get back into gaming.
Sweet.
Anybody but Dan? Dan, you had a question, but...
It's an honest, it's a real question.
What's that?
Is your new game going to have holes?
Is it going to have holes?
More holes.
Holes you can get stuck in? I mean, people got to have something to complain about, for God's sake. Or it just wouldn't be a game.
No, the real question is, when do you anticipate doing a new game?
That's a really good question. Which brings me to another topic I want to discuss, which is the lessons that I learned on E.T. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned doing E.T. is don't rush a project if you want it to be good. So like my book, I was going to have that done, for this convention. A year ago when I started writing it, I was like, I'm going to have it done by then. And it's not done, but it's going to be a better book for them. And so in terms of when that game is going to come out, I haven't even started that game yet. So I don't know, but that game is not going to be rushed. I would say look for it in the conservatively 1.5 to 3 year time frame. I would say that's probably likely. A lot of that time is going to be me not getting to it, I would say. But Does that answer your question fairly?
sir.
Because that is a good question. That's a tough one. Put me on the spot. I'm used to being on the spot. Okay, yes.
Yes, I'm a senior software engineer, and a large part of my job is to mentor a lot of juniors. Do you have any advice for like someone getting into the software field as far as like navigating the business, or it sounds like don't rush a project is that's really great advice.
Don't rush a project is great advice. Don't tell your manager about that advice, though. But so, in getting into software or getting into game software?
Well, I've worked in like business software, so I'm not in the games industry, but yeah, just engineering.
Okay. So, you know, the advice that I would have for someone getting into software is find someone who really knows what they're doing, someone you really respect, and listen to them. Because they will tell you what you're doing wrong, and they will tell you how to avoid other problems in the future. And so that's like the best idea. And as a senior programmer or a senior engineer, you know, you're there to mentor your people. You know, so when I would ask you, you know, the therapist in me would say, well, what do you think is the most important thing you have to convey to the people who work under you? You know, aside from watch out for my feet. No, that wasn't a good one. Okay, fine. They're not all gems, but I'm trying out here. So, you know, and that's really one of the key things. Is there's very little general advice you can give because each kind of job you do in software is so different and so unique. Software in some ways is the same everywhere you go because it's all just code, right? But on another level, what you're doing it for, who you're doing it for, what's your level of commitment to it, what's your level of engagement with it, how familiar are you with the customer, how much do you care about your customer, because we don't always have to care about our customer, it depends on what we're doing. Those are all factors that go into, you know, the quality that I'm going to deliver as a software engineer. And different jobs call on different parts of them. So I think that's it. There was one over here, wasn't there? We had a withdrawal. Okay. Okay, way back there, and then we'll come up here.
Yeah, so you had 3 games come out at Atari. Were there any other projects that you worked on that didn't get published that you wish had been published?
What an interesting question. Were there any other games? How many of you think I have done 3 games for Atari? How many of you think I have done 4 games for Atari? How many of you think I've done 15 games for Atari? Holy crap. How many of you think I've only done 2 games for Atari? This is a tough crowd. Okay, I actually did 4 games for Atari, but one of them wasn't released until 20 years later. I think I have the longest development schedule in history based on that. It was a game called Saboteur. And this was the game that I did after E.T., after I got over my burnout after E.T., which took a little while. And it was a cool game, but it was getting ready to go, it was almost done, and then Atari said, wait, we got an A-Team license. Let's use Howard's game for the A-Team. So we yanked the graphics and we reworked the game and made it all for a giant Mr. T head that you ran around with, and that was kind of cool. And then they were getting ready to release that, and they go, oh wait, we're not going to do the 18 lights. That's ridiculous. Let's go back to Saboteur. So then we reworked the game back to Saboteur, working on finishing it, and then basically they sold Atari to the Tremels, and that was pretty much the end of game development at Atari. So I had nearly finished it. This was my unfinished symphony, right? But what happened was when they put out the joystick retro system, somebody dug out my Saboteur code and put that out, and that's on. So the Saboteur, I believe, is on one of the joysticks, and it was, actually it was Al Yaruso, there's a guy from Atari Age, who actually got it together and put together a cart and did a release of the 2600 cart. Some of you may actually have a copy of the Saboteur. There's at least one. I've signed it, so I know it's out there. And so that was it. So I've actually did 4 games for Atari, but I wasn't at Atari when the last one was released. But I do think 20 years is probably the longest. So I have not only the shortest development cycle for the 2600, I also have the longest one. So I didn't even really think about that before. Thank you. How are we doing? Wow. This is going good. So there was a question over here.
So I was going to ask exactly the same question.
The same question? Well, then let me just say ditto. Yes.
Weren't there actually 5 games?
There were not actually 5 games.
Othello.
Oh. That's it. I met Othello the other day, walking around the floor saying he was me.
But a guy named Howard autographed mine.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go out there and get my autograph from somebody. That would be quite an experience. Yes?
So the 4 games you did, what was the most technically challenging to put together, time notwithstanding?
Time notwithstanding, I would say that Raiders of the Lost Ark was the most technically challenging. There was a lot of pretty elaborate techniques I developed for that. The CT flies and the snake were kind of very cool effects, I thought, on the machine. There was a lot of stuff going on. I think Saboteur had some of the tightest kernel work that I did. But I think Raiders was probably one of the most challenging things because, and it was just trying to create a game. Here's the thing about doing adventure games. Like Warren Robinette, I totally agree with Joe. I mean, Warren Robinette did a genre-defining work in adventure. So when I was going to do an adventure game, I thought, I don't like to do something unless I'm really going to make a contribution with it. That's just very important to me. I don't like doing knockoffs, which was what really offended me when I presented my whole design to Spielberg for the E.T. game, and he goes, couldn't you do something more like Pac-Man? And I was like, what? You want me to? I was going to say, well, couldn't you do something more like The Day the Earth Stood Still, Steven? You know, but I didn't say that because this was Steven Spielberg and I wasn't that far gone. But I was close. I was really close. But I wanted to do something that was a real contribution. And doing something beyond adventure is a huge task. And I think, so I wanted to make the biggest game there was on the 2600. I wanted to make something that was so big and so vast with so many different gameplays and so much going on that, you know, people couldn't believe it. And I think to this day, there are 2 games that qualify in the adventure category that are like that. And I think, so I believe I succeeded with Raiders in creating something that was huge. But I did it in a way of trying to make it as broad and different and unique and stuff like that. There was another game that was done that just went for the most screens you can do, and it was done in a very smart way, that way. And if you look back a few rows behind you to your right, you'll see David Crane, who did Pitfall. And that's usually known as the biggest adventure game on the system. So congratulations, Dave. Nice work. It is a great game. But the key defining thing about doing a real adventure game when you're trying to do it is like when you do an action game. I think if you do an action game well, you can have the player's experience. You can actually have the experience of any player, and so you can judge your game, you can gauge your game, and you can tune it well. When you do an adventure game, like a puzzle-solving game where you have to figure things out and uncover secrets, if you're the secret maker, you can never have the experience of a player. So how do you judge your game? How do you gauge how you're doing? How do you check how hard it is? It's really hard to do that. You can't have the first-person experience when you design an adventure game. And that's a really tough thing about designing a game, right? So when you do action games, you can reliably tune your game. When you do an adventure game, you don't have that opportunity. So you have to rely on feedback of others and watching people play. And anytime someone's played it, you have to throw them out and find somebody new to play, you know, beyond that. It's an interesting phenomenon. But I just wanted to put that out there. So that was the most challenging thing about Raiders. I think we got time for one more.
How did the elements of Yar's Revenge get their names? Did you come up with Yar and Kotile?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because that's a couple of chapters in the book right there. The naming of Yar's Revenge didn't happen until the very end of the game. I just made what I thought were eye-popping, glittery stuff, and I tried to use my economics degree more than my engineering degree in the making of Yar's Revenge because I just looked for super economical stuff, like the ion zone in Yar's Revenge is the code from the cart. I just picked up code from the cart, put it in the graphics register, and then I put it in the color register so I didn't have to do extra grabs, and it was just, that was the kind of stuff that I would do, and it turned out to look cool, so I said, great. I got free graphics and fewer cycles, it's all good. So when it came to naming stuff in the game, I was really excited about it. Because one of the things on my bucket list is make a contribution to the English language. And when I found out it was time, I was doing a game and people liked the game and it might be a cool game, I thought, hey, I'm going to name this character. And if this game gets really big, this character might actually become common parlance and everyone will know this thing, and bingo, I get to contribute a word to the English language. And I thought, yeah, this is my opportunity. So I started thinking, what am I going to call it? What am I going to call it? What am I going to call it? And when you try to make up a word, whatever you think of sounds stupid. At least it did to me. So what I did was I went back to the programmer brain, and instead of trying to just make something up, I decided, let's go algorithmically. Let me think of a way to define a name. And what I thought of was, what's a name around Atari that nobody's going to mess with? And I thought, Ray Kazar. That's the name of the CEO of Atari. That's a name people don't want to mess with. What's Ray spelled backwards? Yar. Oh, that fits. That sounds nice. That should work. What's Kazar backwards? Razak. All right. And so then I wrote a whole story. I wrote a story about the Yarian revenge of Razak 4, the planet that was destroyed. And that's what the Ion Zone is, the remnants of that planet. And I wrote a whole story that goes along with the name, because a name in a story is stronger than just a name. And then the other parts of the game I just made up. I made up Kotile as the monster because I always liked the idea of Q's without a U after it because I hate rules. But you'll find the most innovators are rule breakers. You know, they're people with boundary issues. And so I just don't like that. And the Zorlon canon, you know, Z's and Y's are really good in science fiction. If you can't use a Q, go with a Z or a Y. And so that's why I kind of came with Zorlon, because if Zorlon isn't a canon, it's definitely going to be a synthetic fabric of some sort that maybe they invented. And that's basically where the names came from. First one was basically a play on Ray Kazar, so that I could push it through marketing. And the other ones I did just make up. Like most of this talk. So I think we are out of time here. So I just want to say thank you all so much for coming in. I'm going to be autographing stuff. And my wife would get very upset if I don't tell you I did here's my Once Upon Atari DVD, which I will have for sale over at the autograph thing. This is the only piece of media that only has people who worked on the VCS talking about what it was like to really be a game designer at Atari. It was intense. But thank you all so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it.